Hello there. My name is Jasom Jensai. Welcome to Star Wars Duels. This episode will be Grandmaster Yoda versus the father of Mortis. It was suggested by frequent commenter Ahsoka Tano. Thanks for the suggestions. If you've never seen an episode of Star Wars Duels before, this is how it's going to work. I'll start by analyzing each combatant's physical abilities. Then I'll go over their force skills. After that, I'll discuss their tactics and style. Finally, I'll describe a potential duel scenario between the two fighters. The battlefield for that scenario will be Kijimi. Yoda is quite possibly the most powerful Jedi to have ever lived. He has hundreds of years of wisdom and knowledge, which give him a huge advantage against nearly everyone he has ever faced. However, the father is presumably an immortal being who existed long before Yoda was ever born. Yoda is a remnant from the Jedi Order in its prime. He's mastered the Force and he's mastered himself, but his opponent is equally impressive. The father is the representation of the Force in balance. He's calm and selfless, but more importantly to this video, he is powerful. Out of these top-tier beings, who would come out victorious? Master Yoda is one of the greatest lightsaber duelists ever. In the very first episode of the Clone Wars, we see him take on an army of battle droids, with the help of a few clones. He starts taking down several droids by simply dodging at the right moments and letting them shoot themselves. He then aids the clones in escaping some super battle droids, but his greatest feat in this episode comes after all this. By himself, Yoda takes on an entire line of separatist forces. How many droids were there? Well, it's complicated. So in this shot, we see what seems to be all the droids lined up. 9 B1 battle droids, 8 B2 battle droids, and 3 AATs. However, over the course of the minute and 58 second battle, we see Yoda take out 6 B2 droids, the 3 AATs, and 30 B1 battle droids. And that's not all, because the battle is a minute and 58 seconds long, but we only see a minute and 8 seconds of it. The other 50 seconds are divided between shots of the clones, Ventress, and the droidicas. More on them later. Assuming Yoda destroyed droids at the same rate on and off screen, he would have destroyed 52 B1 droids, 10 B2 droids, and 5 AATs. It's pretty clear throughout the battle that there are 3 AATs, so we know that this number is not quite accurate. But if anything, this just inflates the number of B1s and B2s he destroys. Though we can't know the exact number of droids he took on, we do know that Yoda was able to destroy a lot of droids with no problem. Before that, in episode 2, Yoda had a duel with Count Dooku. Count Dooku is a master of Form 2 style dueling. He has demonstrated incredible skill and poise in his frequent duels with Skywalker. Despite Dooku's skill, I had considered Yoda's duel with Dooku one of Yoda's lesser feats. That was before I considered all the factors. Though the duel ends in a tie, with neither duelist capturing or killing the other, Yoda clearly won the duel. Dooku was the one retreating. We also need to consider the manner of Dooku's retreat. Dooku didn't simply break contact and run away. He needed a big distraction to escape, which came by the way of a giant pillar. Not only that, but Dooku's style is noticeably different when fighting Yoda. Unlike in most of his duels, Dooku doesn't use the Force as much in his duel with Yoda. Unlike his duel right before with Anakin and then Kenobi, I doubt Dooku was holding back his Force powers because he didn't need them. Rather, I think he didn't have time to utilize them effectively. Both these details make me think that Dooku was under a lot more pressure than he seemed to be. The last point I wanted to bring up considering this duel is that Dooku was Yoda's former apprentice. This has two big impacts on this duel. The first is simple. When you know an opponent well, you have a much easier time defending yourself. Though you can also attack more effectively, defenses are bolstered more. This is because effective surprises usually manifest as an attack, so not having any surprises for your opponent will make it much harder to defeat them. The second reason this is significant is that it would impact Yoda's motives. Earlier in the movie, when Palpatine implies that Dooku is behind the assassination attempts on Padme, Windu reminds the Chancellor that Dooku was once a Jedi, and that type of thing is just not in his nature. How much more faith in Dooku would his former master have? Though Yoda senses the dark side within Dooku, it would still be difficult for him to fully attack his former Padawan. After looking at all the evidence, I should think this is one of Yoda's most impressive fights. Forcing Dooku onto the retreat with so many circumstances demonstrates Yoda's speed and skill. The last fight I want to discuss is Yoda's fight with Sidious. Sidious is an extremely skilled duelist. He was able to defeat Mon Savage both at once. More impressively, he was able to beat Agan Kolar, Saesee Tiin, and Kit Fisto in just a few seconds while fending off Windu. Despite his incredible speed and ferocity, Yoda was able to match the Dark Lord with his lightsaber abilities. Yoda may not be the strongest warrior ever, but his speed and skill make him one of the greatest duelists ever. The father is not known for his physical prowess. He doesn't even wield a lightsaber. However, he does have a few tricks up his sleeve. First, he is incredibly skilled with True Menace, so skilled that he can shove lightsaber blades back into their hilts. This is beyond anything we've ever seen from anyone except the daughter. While the daughter was able to match the son's red force lightning, the father was not. The fact that the father was unable to absorb the force lightning, and he was able to absorb the son's lightning, implies that the lightning is more powerful than a lightsaber, if less focused. Despite this power, the father has survived being struck by the son's lightning multiple times. The father is one of the most durable beings in the galaxy. Of course, you cannot win without offense. If all you can do is survive, you're no harder to defeat than a piece of grass, or a mountain. So how powerful is the father in other aspects? Well, it's hard to say. I suspect that he is at least of the average speed and strength. What we do know is that he has a couple powers that help him with mobility. The first is his ability to fly. Though we do not see much of his ability, we see enough to know that he has decent speed, though probably not as much as his children. Not only can he fly, but the father can also teleport. Just before Anakin is tested to be the chosen one, the father is explaining what's going to go on, and Anakin looks away for a second. When he looks back, the father is suddenly on the balcony above Anakin. While the father's teleportation ability may give him an edge, he never uses it in combat, not even to escape. He does use flight, however. This leads me to believe that flight comes more naturally and teleportation is more difficult to pull off. Either way, in a fight against Yoda, both abilities would be helpful, but not game-changing. Yoda's speed and his enhanced jump would allow him to keep up with the father despite these powers. There is also the father's true menace, and his toughness. While the father is tough, I think a lightsaber would be able to kill him, unless he was able to use true menace. The problem is that all of the father's physical abilities are defensive. Yoda is faster, stronger, and more skilled. He has offense and defense, and so Yoda would have the physical edge. Master Yoda is one of the greatest Force duelists ever. In many ways, his Force skills are the opposite of his physical skills. While he focuses on speed and agility with his physical powers, he focuses on strength with his Force powers. Of course, Yoda is not a pure brute Force duelist. During the Battle of Toydaria, he uses the Force to lift up a super battle droid and rewire it to continue firing as he spins it toward its allies. This is a level of precision rarely seen from Jedi, and a level of accuracy rarely seen from B2 battle droids. After the battle, Ventress attempts to kill King Katunko, the king of Toydaria. However, her blades are stopped inches from the king's throat. Yoda had used the Force to grab onto Ventress. This doesn't seem like Force stasis to me. Ventress is able to turn her head, and usually Force stasis applies to the target's entire body rather than just her arms. This means that Yoda is literally overpowering Ventress with simple telekinesis. After releasing his hold on her, Ventress attacks Yoda himself, but the Jedi Master simply disarms her with a Force pull. Ventress is not a weak Force user, and yet Yoda is able to break through her Force wall with seemingly no effort. In his duel with Sidious, Yoda demonstrates his strength again. Sidious begins throwing Senate pods at Yoda, but eventually, Yoda decides to fight back with his own Senate pod. Yoda is able to match the Dark Lord's strength in the Force. Sidious is one of the most powerful Force users ever. He's strong enough to overpower Maul and Savage at the same time, yet Yoda is able to match his strength. However, where Yoda falls short is in his speed. Though he is by no means slow with the Force, he is not notably fast like he is notably strong. His fastest use of the Force is this simple Force push against Sidious. Though it's certainly not slow, compared to the strength he demonstrates later in the fight, it's kinda disappointing. His duel with Dooku starts with a contest of the Force. At one point, Dooku breaks apart a section of the ceiling. Though the weight is well below what we have seen Yoda lift at other times, he also has to contend with the telekinesis of Dooku. Dooku is able to exceed the strength of Dooku by the weight of the rocks. At the end of the fight, Dooku crushes a pillar, which falls straight towards Obi-Wan and Anakin. Though Yoda struggles a bit with the pillar, he manages to lift the entire thing and move it to the side. Later in Episode 5, Yoda is able to lift an entire X-Wing out of the swamp on Dagobah. Though the pillar in Geonosis was probably heavier, Yoda is able to lift the X-Wing with seemingly very little strain. The father yet again has next to no feats. Though it is presumable that the father is strong, his only visible use of the Force is Tuda Menace and a Force push on his children. Though it may seem impressive that the father is able to Force push both children at once, we really don't have a reliable way to measure the strength of the Force walls. That and they were both distracted. One thing we do have is the father's Tuda Menace. As stated earlier, the father's Tuda Menace is so strong it allows him to grab and hold on to lightsabers. If his telekinesis is as powerful as his Tuda Menace, he would be one of the greatest Force duelists ever. Unfortunately, that's a pretty big assumption, especially because a lot of the Force power is used by the Mortis gods, or a lot of their combat is centered around Force lightning and the stopping of Force lightning. So naturally, the father's Tuda Menace would be much stronger than a normal Jedi who doesn't really need to block Force lightning much, especially because of the era they're in and also they have their lightsabers. Though I do suspect that the father is stronger than Yoda simply by comparing the two man's powers, there is really not much proof, so I declare this round a tie. Yoda is a cool, confident tactician. When confronting a Force user, he generally begins by trying to capture his opponent with nothing but the Force. This strategy limits unnecessary injuries that would be caused by lightsaber wounds. Though this strategy fails against Palpatine and Dooku, we see it used successfully on Ventress. If his Force powers fail, Yoda tends to resort to his lightsaber next. Unlike his apprentice Dooku, Yoda rarely mixes Force powers into his lightsaber sequences. When he activates his lightsaber, he tends to finish the fight with his lightsaber. When battling the Emperor, he almost sheathed his lightsaber too late. Sidious's Force-thrown Senate pods nearly overcame Yoda, but as soon as he deactivated his lightsaber, he took the upper hand. Yoda uses Form 4, though when necessary it can fall back in Form 3. Form 4 is very acrobatic while Form 3 is defensive. Yoda's lightsaber form fits him very well. He compensates for his small size by using the rigorous acrobatics of Form 4. He doesn't need to worry about reach when he can jump to wherever he wants. Also, his already small target becomes harder to hit when he starts jumping around like crazy. Some say that Windu is the master of Form 7. Others say that Obi-Wan's mastery of Form 3 is even more complete. Yet no Jedi has ever mastered a single form to the degree that Yoda has mastered Form 4. The father, on the other hand, is most certainly not a warrior. When the son threatened him with the dagger of Mortis, he had several options. He could have A. launched a Force push. He could have B. teleported behind the sun. C. flown away with his wings. D. he literally could have just punched him in the face. Unfortunately, he chose the last option. Option F. threw his arms over his face and hoped the sun would stop. Because of his lack of experience, the father doesn't really have a strategy. When confronting his children, he simply dropped out of the sky and launched a Force push. The father is a powerful and ancient being, but experience outside of combat is not going to help him. Yoda does not have the best strategy, but he clearly has the tactical edge due to his experience. The battlefield for this video is Kijimi. Kijimi is a cold, rocky planet. Despite the snow, the streets are not very icy and clear of snowdrifts. However, there is lots of clutter along the streets, whether that's Pacific's goods for sale or loose cobblestones. In a battle between Force sensitives, every scrap not nailed down can be used as a weapon. But would it be used as a weapon? I'm confident that Yoda would use debris as a weapon, but with the father's lack of battle experience, he probably wouldn't be as tactical. Also, the father has lots of room to escape with his ability to fly. However, the roofs of the buildings would give Yoda an opportunity to jump higher and somewhat nullify this advantage. The terrain favors Yoda, though that's mostly because of his far superior tactics. In almost any terrain, Yoda would find more advantages than the father. If you've enjoyed the analysis, make sure to like the button, subscribe, comment. You just look for buttons and start hitting stuff. You'll figure it out. Yoda leaned on his stick in the middle of a deserted street. Tiny flakes of snow whirled around him. His breath was barely visible in the cold air. Across the street, a tall, slender man in gray robes stood watching Yoda with his piercing blue eyes. The man appeared weak with age. The warm power emanated from the man through the Force. It was a power that surpassed what Yoda had felt from any other Jedi. Unfortunately, it was a power Yoda would have to feel the power of personally. He hobbled forward, meeting the eyes of his opponent. He felt through the Force, trying to anticipate the man's tactics. How would he fight? He seemed wary, inexperienced, and something else. Regretful? Yet despite his apparent passiveness, there was a confidence. Clearly, he knew his power. In an instant, Yoda embraced the Force and let its power flow through him, guiding it into a concussive blast of energy. As he released his power, Yoda felt a spike of panic and released tension from the man. The man shot backwards, sliding along the rough cobblestones, pushed by Yoda's Force push. As he came to a stop, the man thrust forward his own hands. Yoda felt himself tumbling backward through the air. He quickly re-arched himself and landed in a roll. Now 40 meters away, the man straightened as though nothing had happened. Underestimate him, I cannot, Yoda thought as he began running toward his opponent. With the Force, Yoda began picking up loose stones from the walls of crumbling buildings. One by one, he launched them towards the man. Each rock was caught and redirected, however. Yoda ran up the side of the wall as he neared the man. He lifted up a basket of red berries and launched it at the father. Before it reached its target, he twisted it. Berries poured out of the basket, forming a red cloud, which slammed into the father. Yoda swirled them around his target, blinding him as he sailed overhead. A Force repulse from the man sent hundreds of berries in every direction. They splattered into the walls of nearby buildings and shot high into the air, disappearing into the dark sky. Yoda held up an arm, and the flow of berries parted around him. As his opponent re-entered himself and spun to face him, Yoda reached out with the Force and tugged on a nearby building. The building collapsed toward the man in gray, but Yoda felt an opposing pressure shoved the wave of rubble all the way over the gray man and onto the next building over. Yoda slammed the man back with a Force push. This time, the man tumbled to the ground. Yoda ignited his lightsaber and leapt toward his opponent. At a gesture from the man, a building to Yoda's left began collapsing to form a barrier between Yoda and his opponent. Yoda landed on a long support beam and quickly launched himself over the top of the wave of rubble. As he landed on the other side, a pair of wings appeared on the gray man's back. The man shot into the air, followed closely by Yoda. Yoda jumped down the side of the building and higher into the air. He threw his lightsaber ahead of him. The man spread his wings to avoid the lightsaber. Yoda slammed into the man. Despite his light weight, he knocked the man off course. He was clutching the man around the arm near the shoulder and hanging onto his back. The man struggled in the air, trying to swat Yoda off. As Yoda kicked at the man's wings, hoping he could drop to the ground, Yoda felt for his kyber crystal with force. He called it back to him, and a second later, he caught a flash of metal out of the corner of his eye. Yoda triumphantly stretched out his hand and caught his lightsaber, immediately igniting it and plunging it into the man was gone. Yoda caught himself on the ground, but his lightsaber was knocked from his hand by a rock. Dozens of rocks shot past Yoda, and only his instinctive reliance on the Force allowed him to dodge the pieces of rubble. Yoda quickly located the man through the Force. The man's confidence had grown. A metal pipe shot past Yoda, but Yoda ducked underneath it. Yoda had to take control of the fight. He caught several rocks before launching them back and jumping into the air. As he soared toward his target, he stretched back his arm and pulled his lightsaber. It snapped into his hand, and the blade burst to life as he brought his hand forward in an overhand throw. The lightsaber spun through the air, straight toward his opponent's heart. The man caught the blade between his hands. Yoda was stunned for a second, but mastered his emotions quickly, and trusting the Force, turned instinct into action. He blasted the man back with a quick Force push. He landed on the man's chest. The force of the impact knocked the man to the ground. He summoned his lightsaber out of midair and plunged it into the man's chest. Yoda's style is actually very well equipped to take on the Mortis trio. As Force wielders without a lightsaber, they tend to prefer to keep some distance between them and their opponents. But Yoda's agile style combined with his emphasis on speed make him very difficult to keep away. Overall, I think Yoda would win 70% of the time. But what do you think? Make sure to leave a comment in the comment section. Thanks again to Ahsoka Tano for the video suggestion. May the Force be with you.